We are now joined by Wayne Hart, Chief Meteorologist for WEHT and WTVW Eyewitness News. Wayne, thank you so much for being here.
Good to be here, Noah.
It's always great to see you,
good
former
to see
colleague.
You yes.
So a few weeks ago, the area had, significant flash flood warnings. Is that rare for our region?
Well, what we went through in June on the north and west sides of Evansville was almost historic. I would say it was probably a once in a 10-year event.
Wow.
And maybe even 20 years. Talking to some people who got flooded out, they had never seen that kind of water in their neighborhoods. The airport had a little over 3 inches in 3 hours, but we had unofficial reports from those neighborhoods of 5 inches of rain in 3 hours.
Unbelievable.
And that was just from a line of storms. It was just cell after cell was training, just like a boxcar, a train of boxcars, just dumping heavy rain over the same location. And the sewers and the drainage, they couldn't handle that. And so we haven't seen that kind of flooding in Evansville in quite a while.
And obviously, we think, rain contributes to flash flooding. What other factors, though, come into play when things really start to flood? I know you mentioned the sewer system.
Oh, yeah.
What comes into play with all of that?
Well, we know certain parts of the city flood worse than others. Southeast side has had issues over the years, the aqueducts on the west side. So that's where it kind of makes it tricky when it comes to putting a warning out, because we know the heavy rain is falling. But say an inch of rain in an hour in one part of town is going to have a different impact than it would in another part of town, just depending on how well things drain. And we're in an old city, and obviously our sewage system, the drains through the neighborhoods are not what they could be, but that's typical for a city this old. And so we have those issues, and that's when it's important for us to get reports of what's happening, because we know it's raining heavy, we're just not quite sure what it's doing out there.
And I'm curious, when you mentioned the southeast side, are there of the city of Evansville, are there areas though in other parts of the tri-state that might be more prone to flash flooding? You think of West Kentucky, maybe.
Yeah. It's more
areas?
Urban flooding for us. I mean, other parts of the area, especially Western Kentucky, have to worry about river flooding, like we saw back in the spring. Long rain or long-term heavy rain events, and I think this spring it was over 10 inches of rain in 3 days that caused all the creeks, rivers, and streams to go over their banks and cause, in some cases, catastrophic flooding in parts of Western Kentucky. So that's a little different. That's what generally they have to worry about there. But for most of us here in the metro, it's just urban flooding. And we see that in Owensboro also. It's a city that can't really handle a lot of rain in a short period of time.
We saw what happened in Texas around the 4th of July. Conceivably, though, is that type of catastrophic flooding, is that even possible? Could that happen here in the tri-state?
Not likely, because that was a hilly area of central Texas, and it was occurring on a somewhat dry riverbed. And so obviously when you have rivers and creeks running down hills, that can accelerate the water. And in the case of the hill country there in central Texas, a few weeks ago, it was relatively dry. So as that heavy rain hit the ground was almost like concrete. So it didn't soak in, it just rushed down, and what was a small creek or river all of a sudden was a raging torrent of deadly flooding. So we don't have enough elevation around here for that to be an issue. Now you get to eastern Kentucky, yes, but not so much here in the tri-state.
Can you walk our viewers at home through the kind of watch and warning process? How and when are they issued?
Well, the watch is issued hopefully a day or two ahead of time, and they all come from the National Weather Service. As a TV meteorologist, I can talk about, I think flooding could be an issue, but the actual watches and warnings come from the Weather Service. And for Evansville and most of our area, it's the Paducah office. And so they will identify heavy rain threat, and they were all over the event in the spring over Western Kentucky. The models were advertising that several days in advance. So they had flood watches out, and it was upper end, like this is really going to be bad. This is not just your average flash flood that's going to happen, and indeed it turned out that way. And so as the event is unfolding, that's when the warning is issued. But it's not quite the same as, say, a severe storm or a tornado, where we know there's a tornado, we kind of know what direction it's moving, and everything in that path is going to be impacted. But when it's heavy rain, like I said earlier, some areas will be impacted more than others. So that's why it's not a heavy rain warning, it's a flash flood warning, depending on just how your area is handling that amount of rain. And so that's where the Weather Service really relies on emergency management. And we have what's called a chat system where all the EMA managers and staff, along with broadcast meteorologists, can communicate. And during an event like that, they'll say, yeah, we're starting to get roads underwater on the west side of Evansville, and then they'll put the warning out based on that. I mean, some cases, it's pretty obvious. You're getting just torrents of rain, and you know there's going to be flash flooding, but it's those borderline cases where you're not quite sure if it's a situation that warrants a warning.
A lot goes behind the scenes, behind the curtain that people often don't see when they see you get up on the evening news. How can people, aside from watching you, Wayne, how can they stay aware of local weather warnings? Is it?
Well, in this era, you have, everybody's got a smartphone. So, we have our weather app, and there's other kinds of apps that you can get alerted to a warning on your phone. Weather radio is a good standby because we always tell people to have multiple ways to get warnings, because a cell phone tower can be taken out by a storm, and all of a sudden your phone is worthless when it comes to getting information. So weather radio is a good way to get that information, and of course television and radio. But I think when it comes to flash flood warning, it's one of those things that, it's just flash flood warning. Now, if it's tornado warning, yeah, that's going to get me excited and interested and concerned. But a lot of people just say, it's a flash flood warning. And for some, it's not an issue. It's often, it's a situation where it's people away from their home. I mean, yeah, you can have some flooding in your home, but it's when we start to get into the situation where it's really dangerous is when people try to drive through flooded roadways.
Now, what should people do if there is a flash flood warning in their area? What do you recommend individuals do?
Well, I mean, you get to high ground if you're in an area that is susceptible to a lot of flooding. Now, that's not so much a case around here because we don't have big changes in elevation. So I think the one important thing to know is that when you're driving in a flash flood warning, respect the water. And we always say, turn around, don't drown. You see a flooded roadway, just turn around, don't try to drive through it. And that's where most of the fatalities occur in flash flooding are people trying to drive through a flooded roadway. And in some cases, the road closed sign is already there. And they still go around and thinking, well, I got a truck, I can do this. This is why I have a truck, so I can go through weather like this. But you don't know how deep the water is, you don't know how fast it's moving, and you don't know the condition of the road underneath. So it's quite possible you get out there, all of a sudden the road has washed away, your vehicle stalls, and then you fill up with water and get swept away. And that's how the fatalities happen. So turn around, don't drown, respect the high water, and just don't try to drive through it.
Great insight and expertise as always. Eyewitness News Chief Meteorologist Wayne Hart, thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure to be here, Noah.